guys, welcome back to MCollings Art. Today we're going to talk about thumbnailing for making comics. We're going to go ahead and take this little script piece we've got on the screen right now and transform that into a fully fleshed out thumbnail page that we can work on our pencils from. This is what my comic script pages look like. It's a template that I use for GoodNotes 5. You can find it down in the description down below. But I find that I script a lot easier and better this way using my iPad and kind of like using my own handwriting. It allows me to change the color and the size of the text really intuitively and add notes and annotations and things like the little highlighted sound effects. I also find that this way is a lot easier for me to export or print off these pages. So if I wanted to thumbnail with a pencil or if I wanted to thumbnail in Clip Studio Paint like I'm doing here, it's a lot simpler for me to do that than it would be with like a word processing program or a scripting program. We talked about in the last comic video how I have found breaking these scripts out into tiers and into panels, and I got that from Becca Hillburn's thumbnail video, which is linked in the description. Go check out their video if you want to see that kind of broken out in more depth, but basically what I'm doing is taking this little script bite that I want to do for this page, and then I'm breaking that into tiers, kind of 3 tiers, so that I have my different like levels on the page, and then I'll break those tiers out into panels. This gives me a really good idea of how I want the page to look before I actually sketch it out. Because I have sort of a degree of aphantasia, which means I can't really imagine things very well, it's hard for me to see things visually in my brain without actually drawing them first. So this kind of helps me jump that little ravine and get to where I need to go. For my comic that I'm working on right now, for the first couple of thumbnails, I just kind of drew a random sized ratioed rectangle on the bottom of my script pages. And then when I tried to move that over to the actual pages to pencil it, I had to do a lot of finagling and a lot of reworking those thumbnails to get them to fit the pencil pages. So this little stamping rectangle that I've made here is just so that it is perfectly the right size for the pages that I'm using. I'm planning on printing the comic that I'm currently working on using Mixam printing, and those page sizes are 6.7 inches by 10.2 inches. So I've just sort of made this rectangle so that when it scales, it will fit that size. At this point, I'm basically just translating those little panels that I've written out for each tier into an image in the thumbnail. You can see that these are really sketchy. The perspective is not correct. There's a lot of just sort of basic shapes and stuff like that. I'm not going heavy into the detail. Later in the video, we're going to show an example of what this panel would look like after I've done the pencils for it, and you can kind of compare. One of the first mistakes that I made with thumbnailing comics was I tried to combine the thumbnailing and sketching, or the thumbnailing and penciling step. So I was trying to come out of thumbnailing with basically like the designs and details of each panel finished, and it was really stressful and kind of like broke my brain. So don't do that. Definitely do a thumbnail pass first and just do kind of like the basics, and then come back and do like perspective stuff with your pencils. Sort of the point of the thumbnails that we want to get across here is we're just getting the script from a written format to a visual format. And we want to include places for speech bubbles and sound effects to be, as well as checking the flow of the comic. One of the things with flow is it's kind of difficult to do in the beginning, but it gets easier and easier the more pages you do, the more panels that you like interlink. So you can see here I've kind of intentionally made these very static panels that don't really connect to each other very well, so that we can kind of go back and see what's wrong with those and correct them. And that's what we're going to do in the next step, is kind of take a look at the flow of these panels and decide where we need to move things and kind of what camera angles we need to shift in order to make this more dynamic and also to help the reader to the next panel. That's not to say that your first comic is going to have like beautiful flow and perfect paneling. It definitely won't, and mine definitely doesn't. But as long as you like follow some of these techniques, it will at least be readable. The story will work, and it will have sort of like the mood and the tension building that it needs, and it will help your readers from panel to panel and from page to page. What we want to keep in mind when we're designing these panels does the angle that we're using, does the like camera shot that we're using fit the mood? For this, there's a lot of research to be done into like filmmaking and stuff like that. There's a lot of really interesting things you can learn from dissecting your favorite director's films and doing just kind of like a shot for shot to see like what the different angles that they're using and what the different like areas that they're filming from, how that affects the mood of the film. So right here you can see we're just front on the alarm clock, we're front on the little person sleeping in this bed, and it's sort of just kind of like an average angle on the room. None of this is really building any tension or showing any mood. So we're kind of just reading it as like blah, 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 blah. So we want to make sure that we get to like a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic of a scene and a little bit more expressive angles so that we kind of can pick up from the context clues as a reader what the mood of this page is going to be. Another interesting thing that you might want to research is the 180-degree rule. It's used in theater and also in filmmaking, and it kind of is a description of how you should address characters in a shot or objects in a shot in a way that keeps them on the same, I guess it dictates keeping them on the same side of the shot so that things are orderly and easy to follow. This helps your reader keep track of where the characters are at, and it's kind of jarring if you're in one panel, the character's on the right, and then the next panel it's on the left. You're kind of getting like a weird teleporty feeling from that. So that's worth a little bit more of a look, I think. I'm not 100% on how to use that, obviously, but I do my best to kind of, when there's two characters or two important objects in a shot, to keep them on the same side as we move from panel to panel. So here you can see I've added the sound effects in red to kind of indicate where those are going to be for myself. We're going to go through right here and kind of check our flow. So I'm grabbing another color on a new layer, and then I'm just going to kind of draw arrows following the lines that I can see. I guess this is probably a good point to kind of like discuss how we do movement from panel to panel. You can use things like perspective lines, which is what I've got in this first panel. The perspective lines from the desk and the bed are kind of angling us towards this other panel, but they could be a little steeper. Like we could get a higher angle on the bed. And I think that would be a little bit more dynamic of a shot than this just sort of straight ahead from the end of the bed. You can also use cables, cords, and wires. You can use direction of action, like a falling object or a character walking or reaching for something. You can use action lines, which are simulated motion blur. So if you've got something being thrown and it's got a big trail of like motion blur that you've drawn in, you can use that to lead to the next panel. You can use speech bubble and sound effect placement. So if I had done click from the like fourth panel down, if I had done that so it was angling towards that last panel, that probably would have been better. Something to kind of indicate where I'm supposed to be going. You can see here I've marked several panels that I felt like were too static. So I'm gonna go ahead and like redo those for you really quick and show you what I would actually do for those. Okay, so I've moved the panel that we do like over to a new copy of the script and thumbnailing page. I just kind of saved off a second copy. And we're going to do a little bit higher of an angle on this bedroom scene so that we can kind of see the figure of the sleeping person a little bit better. And then we're also getting like a more dynamic shot, so it's kind of like not like a weird super high creepy angle or like a Dutch angle where it's like everything's tilted to the side, but kind of a higher angle so that we're above the scene. It looks like we're kind of like coming in from the door or the corner maybe. And then we can kind of see all of the details in the room once we get to the pencils and the inks for this. And it gives us kind of an establishing shot that we can get a little bit of information about this person in the bed from their sleeping area. You can see from this, I'm intentionally making the perspective lines point a little bit more directly to that next panel, which is gonna help with our flow a little bit. Before it was kind of pointing like past it or kind of into both of the panels. So we want to make sure that we're directing to the correct panel here with the flow, and then also we can kind of get that more information from that higher establishing shot. I'm also adding in some floorboards here. We're probably going to add a rug because it's weird to have just sort of like tiled or floorboarded floor in a bedroom. But those also will point to that other panel that we're trying to head to. And you can see here when I mark those lines, if they were in proper perspective, they would all be pointing to that next panel for us. This panel we had sort of just a dead-on shot of the alarm clock, and I want to build a little bit of like looming tension here. So we're doing kind of a weird skewed angle of this so that it kind of is a little creepy and like a little bit like it's a looming presence in the frame. And you can see now when we go back and put the arrows back over the top of this panel, those direct us right to the next panel really easily, and then her eyeline and the folds in the blanket take us down to the next row. This one I'm going to direct to that last panel, but I'm also kind of going to accentuate the clicking sound that we're hearing as the alarm clock turns over. And we kind of want to, I've got that like a little bit opposite angled just to kind of create a little bit of interest. That might be breaking the 180 rule. We might be like, we've come too far across in that shot, but we're going to leave it. It's fine. It's an alarm clock. Like I said earlier, like it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just sort of, if you learn as you're going, then you've succeeded. And then this last shot, I'm going to make the alarm clock a little bit bigger in the panel and give it a little bit more motion with some sort of like motion lines around it. I want it to kind of be jumping off of the desk to me, making this like horrible ringing noise that's waking you up. And so I'm going to just kind of indicate that with some, when I ink this, with some crazy squiggles around it to show that it's kind of like jumping around in the air. And then I'm also going to try to point to the next page with the angle of the alarm clock and the angle of the desk that's under it. It's also a little bit of an off angle now as well, instead of just being straight. So that's going to kind of give us a little bit of unrest in the panel. So you can see I did the text here perfectly level, and then I kind of went back and added it at an angle because it looks a little bit more interesting, and it's also going to like mimic that line and take us to the next page. So here they are side by side. I do think the second round that I've labeled B here is a lot more dynamic of a page, shows a lot more detail, and I think it's going to be all around just a better page to look at, less kind of boring angles also. So right here, we're going to go ahead and show what this looks like penciled. So this is the next video. This is sort of like a little preview. But this is kind of what I was talking about with the pencils being different from the thumbnails. So you can see when we go back and we pencil this page, we're going to have so much more detail in this establishing shot. So you can see dirty clothes in the corner. You can see what the wallpaper on the computer is. There's like a little bird chirp noise that I added because I wanted it to be very obvious that this is like, it's morning in this scene. The lighting and the color will also help with that. I'm going to go ahead and demo now how I would set up this little thumbnail patch onto an actual page. This is the template that I use for actually building the pages. This is also in the description below if you'd like to download this for Clip Studio. I don't think it'll work in any other program, but it does work very well for Clip Studio Paint. So I'm just copying over the layer that has the sketch on it, and I'm going to fit it to the inside rectangle in this template, which is the border for my panels. And then I'm going to use the border making tool, the rectangle frame tool in Clip Studio Paint. And I'm going to outline where all of the panels are going to live. And then I'm going to subdivide that into the panels themselves using like the subtool of the rectangle frame. There are two tools for subdividing these panels in Clip Studio Paint. One is Divide Frame Border and one is Divide Frame Folder. I like the border one better because then you end up with one folder that has all of your panels in it, and it just kind of makes one mask. The Divide Frame Folder tool gives you a ton of different folders with a ton of different masks, and then you have to kind of go find which panel you're working on, and that's irritating. I do have my comic that I'm working on right now, The Incidents at Mirkweed Manor, set up like that, and it is so irritating to go and try and find all of those little bits and bobs in the folders. So if you subdivide this and you need to move the panel borders, you can kind of just zoom in and grab one of the blue dots. If you grab the yellow triangles, it will change the width of that little flood area, which you don't want to do. If you need a straight up and down or straight across line, you can hit Shift while you're using the tool, and it will straighten it just like any other tool in Clip Studio Paint. If you want like an equilateral circle or square, that you just use the Shift for that too. And then you just lower your sketch background opacity and you're ready to pencil. So that's kind of how I set up the thumbnails. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for things that I could be doing better, because I'm totally a beginner at this too. There are a ton of resources online for how to lay out panels, and I recommend looking at a lot of sources and a lot of different artists and sort of studying how they do these things. Which of course means you get to read a ridiculous amount of comics, which is a complete chore that no one would ever want to do. I'm definitely not an expert at this, and I feel like this is one of those skills that really improves with practice and time. So do feel free to let me know if there's something in here that's just sort of antithetical to your experience, and we can add it to the comments for other people to learn from. If you're looking for more content like this, you can check out our series of Clip Studio Quick Tips, our recent video about improving your line art, or the previous video in this series about setting up for your first comic. As always, this video is brought to you by my wonderful patrons, Jesse C., Anthony Jutz, and Terror Billie Jean. Thank you guys so much for your continued support.